Hello, my name's Holly Flink, and I will be talking about the innovations in the Blair Witch Project. Of course, I am doing a horror movie. I love horror movies, and I don't think they get enough attention in the filmmaking world because not a lot of people like them, and they're hard to make. Like comedies, it's hard to make something funny, it's hard to make something scary. But Blair Witch Project created a completely new subgenre for horror, for psychological horror, and just created something really new. So, the Blair Witch Project is about these three college kids who went to the woods near Maryland to film a documentary for school about this legend of a Blair Witch being there, and none of them come back. And that's the whole plot of the movie. Now, it's not the first found footage movie ever made. Everyone thinks that it is. A lot of people believe that it is, but it's not. Cannibal Holocaust is actually the first. But Cannibal Holocaust didn't get the recognition for being genius because of all the movies that were coming out in 1980. A lot of new, very famous horror movies were coming out in 1980, and Cannibal Holocaust just didn't carry the innovation of found footage like the Blair Witch did, and it still felt a little staged, whereas the Blair Witch Project did not. So the Blair Witch Project just had more innovation and more fear than Cannibal Holocaust did. And so during this time that Blair Witch came out, it was actually perfect because there weren't a lot of good movies coming out. The 90s had a few gold ones like Silence of the Lambs and The Ring, but closer to the Blair Witch coming out, all you had was The Ring 2, and a lot of slasher sequels were coming out during the 90s. So you didn't really have a lot of really good horror movies coming out. So Blair Witch was kind of like a, whoa, wow, this is actually going to be really good. So Blair Witch created something very new, whereas we were just getting sequels and we were getting sick and tired of them. And so it brought some big innovations. And the four main ones from the movie are camera work, marketing, lighting, and acting. So first of all, let's talk about the camera work. And so the camera work basically ignored all of the professionalism that we had known for generations. I mean, perfect scene composition, 180 rule, all that stuff was thrown out the window because all they did was they had two cameras, a camcorder and an over-the-shoulder camera, and they handed it to the actors, and they filmed it however unprofessional, trained college kids would film. And so they filmed for 8 days, and then they edited for 4 months. I think it's actually longer. They edited it for longer, but that was just for the movie was originally posted for a film festival and then ended up getting picked up to be a full movie. So, you have the lack of professionalism that we are so used to, which made it so much more terrifying and made it so much more real, which is exactly what the directors were going for. But it still had some cinematography planned out. I mean, they planned out the scenes with the rock piles and the tent being attacked and the sticks hanging from the ceiling or from the trees, and then this scene, the house scene, and the basement scene. And you can see that there is a little bit of composition. We put him in the corner. There's nowhere for him to go. There's nowhere for us to go. There's a wall here, which is why it's so lit up. There's nowhere for us to go, and he's being very spooky. So you do have some sort of cinematography planned out, some good camera work, but most of the professional camera work that we are so used to in horror movies and in any other movie was thrown out the window, which is what made this so much more terrifying, which is, like I said, exactly what the directors wanted, which leads me into marketing. Marketing was the hugest innovation that came from this movie. They did not take the common route of most marketing that people did. First of all, they were the first to use internet for marketing. The internet was still kind of very new in the 1999, and so it wasn't like people weren't using it for marketing the way that we are today. So it was kind of the first movie to ever use it, and they didn't use it in a very traditional way. They made a trailer, but the trailer was just the scene where Heather is saying sorry, and then we get a black screen, and it does the whole, in 1994, these 3 college students went to the woods to film this documentary for school, and none of them came back. And that's all it is. That's the entire trailer. That's it. That's all it is. There is no narrator, no actor names, director names, no plot synopsis, nothing. It's just that, which made people feel like it was real. There was no merchandise made. There was a movie poster, but not until later on. They didn't really make a movie poster until later. And so all they had was this trailer that people thought were real, and then they made a website, which further created the idea that the movie was real, which is what exactly Eduardo Sanchez and, I can't remember the other director's last name, it's like really complicated, Mirnick or something like that. That's exactly what they wanted. They wanted people to believe that this movie was real. And so they created this website, which the website I don't think exists anymore. But all it said was who these kids were, why they were doing it, why they did it. They went for a film class. And then if you click the arrows, it took you to a forum page. And the forums is where the legend began for this witch. People started to talk about the, like, oh, it's real. Like, there's a legend here in Maryland about the Blair Witch. And then people talking about the trailer. And they further deepened the idea that this movie was real. And that created this sense of anxiety and thrill, because now people were anxious to see it. Like, did Hexon and Artisan Entertainment, were they just handed found footage to show to the public? A lot of people felt that way. So it deepened the idea that the movie was real, which is exactly what the directors were going for. And it was the first time anybody had used the internet for marketing. So it was a huge innovation at the time. The next big one is lighting. And it kind of follows with camera work, where it had no professionalism. There was 2 lights, 2 main lights. The light on the camera that we see here, and the night vision mode. And this is one of the most terrifying scenes in the movie. And this is all that the camera light, it's a very small length of light that shines. So this scene where she's saying she's sorry to her parents and Michael's parents and Josh's parents, there's all this black space behind her, because she's like in a little tiny corner of the screen, and there's so much darkness behind her, and we can't see any of it, which is what makes it so much more terrifying, because we're like, something's gonna come up behind her, and we can't see it. And the same with the night vision, is that the night vision has a certain length that it can see in front of the camera before it sees nothing, which made it so much more scary as well. And there was no professional lighting set up for the movie at all. And at times reflectors were used, and I think when they're in the basement, there is one like rig light to light it up a little bit more, but beyond that, they only had the 2 lights. And the only time we ever got relief from the darkness and from the fear was when it was in daytime. And even in the daytime, they're in the middle of the woods. Anybody could be out there. Anything could be out there. It wasn't that much of a relief. And then finally, acting. And the reason I say that acting was a huge part of this movie and a huge innovation at the time is because of who they chose. Because if you could imagine George Clooney or Angelina Jolie being in this movie, it would not carry the same amount of fear that it does, because we've seen them in other movies. We know it's not real, but they got actors we had never heard of before, we had never seen before, so we knew, it deepened the idea that this movie was real. And that's something that's really important for a found footage movie like this, is that you don't want to pick anybody that you've seen before. Because if you do, it kind of ruins the idea that this movie is real. So they got these actors we had never seen before, which made it like, oh, these are the actual kids. And the other great part about it was that they had minimal training to be actors. They had real fear on the set. There's an interview with the girl who plays Heather where there was a point where they're out in the woods, and she's like, can we take a break and head towards crew and gather, because she was afraid. And they could be free. I mean, they could look in the camera, they could mess up a little bit on certain lines and certain things because it made it so much more real. So the acting was a huge part of this movie, and it really created the idea of we don't need to use the big fancy expensive actors. We can get people we've never heard of before to create something really terrifying. And from the Blair Witch, so many good movies came out from it. I mean, Paranormal Activity is one of the biggest. Paranormal Activity people thought was real. The first and second one were based off a true story, and people thought that it was actually real because they were just cameras set up in this guy's house, and then it was a movie. And so it was like so terrifying, and all these good ones came out. And then we got The Quiet Place. And the reason The Quiet Place is on here is because they got a lot of their ideas from the Blair Witch. The Blair Witch in 1999 took this idea of found footage, and they wanted to create this horror scenario that made people believe it was real. And A Quiet Place wanted to piggyback on the idea of we don't have to follow the rules of film. So what they did is they took out sound. And silent films aren't they were the thing. They're not that uncommon, but it was that for horror movies, even in Nosferatu, we had music. There's nothing in this. It's just pure silence. There's a lot of silence. There's some little bit of sounds. There's the noises of the creatures. But most of it is silence. And the silence actually made us more scared than the noise. Most horror movies depend on sound. I mean, think about the Blair Witch Project where, like, they're in the woods and they hear a stick break. They're like, what is that? Like, that's scary. You're like, what is it? But in this, you want sound. You want them to talk. You want sound. But you also don't want sound because you don't want them to get heard. But it's so scary because you want sound. And so it's this back and forth of hating and loving sound in the movie. And they took that idea of what we now know as to be professional sound, and they threw it out the window by having none, and it created a very terrifying experience, and they got that idea from the Blair Witch Project. So overall, we had a new wave of creative movies come out, a new subgenre for psychological horror. We had psychological and thriller, but now we had this sub of found footage psychological, which created a completely new psychological experience. And then it gave us the opportunity to look at movie rules and fundamentals and basically throw them out the window. We can now ignore the rules of movies and create our own things if it benefits the movie. And so Blair Witch had a lot of influence on future movies and had really cool innovations that more movies used on in the future. Thank you for listening. And that is the innovations in the Blair Witch Project.